Hey, welcome into Sports Map Houston. I'm Brandon Strange. He's Paul Gallant. You can catch him on the Paul Gallant Show weekdays 10 a.m. to noon on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 FM. If you haven't yet hit subscribe on this channel, go hit subscribe on Paul Gallant's channel. He does appreciate it. We do appreciate it. Hey, Paul, welcome in. One of the, let's call it, fun parts of us doing our videos when we do is we have a Texans game to react to each week. But this week, I don't necessarily want to react to the game on the field. I want to react to a reaction. And that would be Colin Cowherd, who tweeted, "Am I nuts? Davis Mills, with very little fanfare, feels like he's cementing that QB job in Houston, throws a really nice ball, touch, and accuracy." End quote. So for those who haven't been paying attention to Texans games, which, hey, I don't blame you. I don't know why you'd be on this channel, but let's just say you come across our channel and you don't have any context. Davis Mills' QBR for this season is 28 of 32. His QBR this week was actually up to 22 of all active quarterbacks. So let's just keep it simple for this first question, Paul, and that's, is Colin Cowherd nuts? Let's answer his question. Is he nuts?
Yes.
Okay.
He's nuts. We've seen these games. I'm not saying Davis Mills is a catastrophe at quarterback. He has had some flashes where you can talk yourself into him. For example, on Sunday, while they were trying to rally back against the Chargers, on back-to-back plays, he throws a beautiful 50-yard pass to Nico Collins. He throws a touchdown pass the very next play. Those two throws looked awesome. But in the NFL, it's not about whether or not you're able to make plays like that. Just about everybody who gets drafted in the NFL can do that from time to time. These are all extremely skilled football players. It's a matter of doing it consistently. And Davis Mills is more consistent with some of the things that he does that don't work out well. I would say specifically when it comes to his accuracy, when it comes to overthrowing open wide receivers, which we saw again a couple of times against the Chargers. I think if you are maybe seeing Davis Mills on the Red Zone channel, yeah, maybe you can talk yourself into the idea of Mills having a long-term future here. But I think all of us who have been watching it or looking at the statistics, Brandon, that you just laid out, you know that there is an uphill battle for him to prove to us these remaining 13 games that the Texans shouldn't draft somebody.
Yeah, and I'd say it's hard to watch that game and take that away from it when you're watching the same game that includes Justin Herbert. And yes. I mean, and you're also talking prior to the comeback, it just looked like the two teams were playing at very different levels. It looked like a JV squad scrimmaging with the varsity squad or something like that. I mean, it really did look, I mean, and we are talking about a game in which at about the 9:48 mark, left in the half, down 21-0. It appeared the Texans were ready to pull Mills prior to that Pierce touchdown run. So that's a very, I'll call it interesting observation to kind of pull from that game. And so I went down further in because it's Cowherd. Of course, he's saying stuff like that to get a reaction. And he got one.
He got a reaction.
Yeah. And I saw you replied to it as well, which is why I wanted to talk about this. So I was scrolling down through the comments to kind of see, I figured the Texans fans would just jump on him. And they did. Cowherd said that he didn't have anybody. He said, that he didn't have anybody, and that's why Davis Mills wasn't better. And somebody replied to that. Not true. Average O-line and Cooks wouldn't say that's nothing. To which Cowherd replied, well, there's a reason Cooks bounced around the league. McVay let him go. Sean Payton let him go. Look, Brandon Cooks, look, he's not DeAndre Hopkins, but he's had 6 1,000-yard seasons, so that's not nothing. And let's take the Cooks thing out of it. It's a fair point. Point out the roster's not strong. But in your opinion, is the lack of supporting cast the reason that Mills hasn't taken that next step?
I don't think so. I mean, the offensive line is a work in progress. I think with Kenyon Green playing guard, he had a rough game. He had a couple of holding penalties and unnecessary roughness. The sack that Davis Mills took when it looked like the Texans had a chance to potentially take the lead that led to a Mills fumble, that was on Kenyon Green. So you could point at certain aspects. You could point at Pep Hamilton too. It is a collaborative effort. But as you said a little bit earlier, yeah, okay, Brandon Cooks has been around the league, but people have been paying premium to get him on their team. First round picks, second round picks. I mean, that's what the Texans paid. We saw New England do the same thing not too long before that. He's a talented wide receiver. And I think the question about whether or not he has enough after that, Nico Collins had a couple of nice plays in this game. And of course, he's got Dameon Pierce. I think that blaming the situation around Davis Mills is forgetting the fact that a special quarterback should be able to transcend that or make players around him better. Mills isn't doing that. For whatever reason, he and Brandon Cooks have had an issue just getting on the same page, where going into Sunday's game, where Cooks finally did get involved, Cooks had 13 receptions on 29 targets. And you can point to Pep Hamilton for that, but you can also point at some just misfires by Davis Mills. I think it's a very much your Davis Mills mom kind of defense of Mills if you're going that route. He cannot throw and catch the ball himself, to quote Gisele Bundchen, but he's making a lot of these mistakes on his own.
Yeah, and look, I mean, if we brought Andre Johnson, prime Andre Johnson, back, if you miss a guy wide open, you miss a guy wide open. It doesn't matter necessarily who it is. But you brought up Pep, and I'm going to do this a little bit out of order because, what led to that thread was Cowherd also talking about how, he had nothing, but he also had a defensive-minded head coach. And, you brought up Pep and the play calling. Is that, how big is that? Because I think there's a little bit something to that, the fact that you have a defensive-minded head coach. We've been kind of talking about it behind the scenes here, but that's something, right? I mean, that's not really the way the league is now. The league, think about the league now and the more successful teams, they do have offensive-minded head coaches. Like, what are your thoughts on how Lovie being a defensive-minded head coach plays into Davis Mills' development or lack thereof?
Well, I think from this perspective, you're going to be more conservative in situations where other offensive-minded head coaches might be more aggressive, and point to the end of the Colts game where it's not just that they decided to punt the ball away and play for the tie in overtime. It's also that instead of going for it or going for a field goal, they chose to take a delay of game and then punt earlier in the fourth quarter when they had a big lead. I think it was 20-3 at that point in time. So they're going to be conservative. But if we're pointing at things and situations around Davis Mills that's holding him back, I understand to the idea of, okay, if you had a more offensive-minded head coach, perhaps people would be pushing things a little bit more. But I think you have to start focusing on Pep Hamilton. It's a very weird play call when it's a 4th and 1 that you decide right before halftime to have Rex Burkhead on the field instead of Dameon Pierce. I get that you don't want to play Dameon Pierce every single down. That's what Lovie Smith said after the game, and he seemed to be shielding Pep Hamilton a little bit, but on a play where you don't block Khalil Mack and you also have Rex Burkhead on the field as opposed to the guy who took a touchdown 75 yards not too long before, makes no sense. Got to have your best players on the field in critical situations like that. Lovie said that, that they have to go through me when it comes to determining who's on the field in a situation like that. And I will give the Texans credit for, at the very least, when they have brought up issues that they are seeing, they have corrected them the very next week when they've talked about them in the press conferences. But that play and a couple of other moments, this offense is just very sluggish, and you got to point at the offensive coordinator. We thought it would be different with Pep Hamilton here instead of Tim Kelly, who was a disaster as offensive coordinator, and there really hasn't been that much of a change.
Well, I'd say maybe you could say there's a change, but it's in the opposite direction, unfortunately. At least thus far, there's still a lot of season left. I mean, a lot less than there was a couple of weeks ago, but there's more season left. Our opinion could be changed by the end of the year if there's some sort of dramatic turnaround.
So.
And I know it'd be dumb to give up on Mills or anybody just yet in this offense, but the clock's ticking on everybody, I think, right now. Paul, it was always good to talk with you,
Thanks,
even
Brandon.
though it's, we're not talking the most positive things in the world, but it's always better talking with you about it. Appreciate the time.
Thanks.